So today we're going to talk about forgiveness. And I don't know if I've discussed the process that I go through with when I write talks, but they're very fluid. And I just trust that the words that come out are going to be the right words. And when I practice them, they're different every time. And they're also different than when it actually comes out the day of. And I'm thinking this morning there were some things in the Daily Word and the I Am the Thinker that I'm going to include into the talk if I remember at the appropriate time. But it's just interesting how when you let go, you can do more than if you try to hold on. So, and some of the things that I'm going to come today are my thoughts that I've gotten from wherever. Some came from Google searches. So there was a minister that was giving a sermon on forgiveness, and he says, how many people would like to forgive and love, or have been able to forgive and love their enemies? And about half the congregation holds their hands up. He was like, all right, this is good. This is good. I said, now how many people in the congregation would love to be able to forgive and love your enemies? And he looks around and like, everybody else has their hands up. He's like, this is amazing. He goes, and then he sees this one little old lady. She's about halfway back. And she's just sitting there smiling, no hands up, nothing. He's like, well, this is kind of interesting. So he gets down and he goes out and he starts talking to her. And he says, I noticed you didn't put your hands up. Is there a reason that you don't want to forgive and love your enemies? And she says, well, I don't have any enemies. And he's like, thinking to himself, this is really cool. There's this old woman, and she's managed to live her life without any enemies. And he just thinks this is amazing. And he's going to use this. He's going to build this into his talk. So he starts asking. He goes, how old are you? She goes, I'm 96. He goes, wow, amazed that you're getting around all by yourself for 96 years old. I said, how is it that you've been able to live 96 years on this planet and you don't have any enemies? Her smile gets a little bigger. She goes, oh, that's easy. They all died years ago. So if you can't forgive, just wait. So one of the things, and if you guys have read the book, I love quotes, and I love using the quotes that other people say and expanding on those. So we're going to start with a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So it's amazing how closely tied forgiveness and love are. And if we can learn to love, then forgiveness becomes easier. I was thinking about a time when I first got into real estate, and there was another agent that I ended up doing a transaction with, and that agent had a reputation of being difficult to deal with. So I made it my purpose, my plan, to be extra super nice to this gentleman, to do everything I could to make the whole process as easy as possible. And because of that, or because of something else, I didn't experience any of the things that some of the other people had warned me about. He was nice, he was gracious, he helped me through, and everything went very smoothly. Now we're talking about forgiveness today, and I didn't end up having to forgive him for anything because I never got to that point. I was able to love and express and get the best out of the situation before anything happened that I ever thought that I needed to forgive or get forgiveness for or any of that. So, so I think that's the first part of forgiveness, is getting to a point where you don't need to forgive. And that leads us into something that Anthony DeMello said. And if you've never read anything by Anthony DeMello, you really should. He's amazing. He said, if you never condemned, you would never need to forgive. So forgiveness comes from a judgment. And when I think about the daily word for today, see, I remembered. If fear-based judgments cloud my expanding awareness of spiritual truth, I affirm this principle, then remind myself of Jesus' words, judge not. This is talking about compassion. So, compassion is a good way to preempt your need for forgiveness. If we don't judge what's going on around us, if we can accept it, then we don't have to worry about forgiving. And it's amazing how sometimes we look at a situation and we think one thing, and then as we learn more about the situation, that changes. So there was a guy riding on a train, and he had different work hours than, he was a subway train, he had different work hours than most people, so the train wasn't real crowded. He was going home. And this gentleman gets on, and he's got 5 kids with him. And they all sit down, and as the train ride progresses, the kids are up, and they're moving around, and they're making lots of noise, and just causing a big commotion. And he can see that the other people on the train are getting aggravated with these kids. But the dad's just kind of sitting there. He's not doing anything. He's not really paying any attention to them. And he's getting aggravated. He's like, here I am after work, trying to relax on my way home, and this guy gets in here with these kids, and they're just causing a big ruckus. So he finally says, I want to say something. He says, excuse me, sir, I notice your kids are kind of running around making a lot of noise. It'd be nice and considerate to everybody else on the train if you could settle them down a little bit. And the man looks up, he's like, you're right, I'm sorry. We just left the hospital, and their mom just passed away from cancer, and my mind just isn't where it should be. I'll try and rein them in a little bit more. Everybody's on the train that heard that was no longer worried about the kids running around. That was no longer, they weren't judging him as a bad father. They weren't judging them as rambunctious little kids. The situation didn't change, just the amount of information that they had changed, and that changed their opinion. When I used to photograph weddings, I would always tell brides, if your husband says something that upsets you, well, if your husband says something, it can be taken 2 different ways, and one of those ways upsets you, he meant the other way. So as we get to the point of not having, having that compassion, not condemning people, then we don't have to worry about forgiving them. And then I thought about Shakespeare. Because when I think about forgiveness, Shakespeare's always the one that comes up. My mother was an English teacher. For there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And that's a very Unity thing to say. And he was around way before the Fillmores. There are lots of situations that we have in our lives that we decide that this is a good thing or a bad thing. And then if we decide that it's a bad thing, there's oftentimes when we reflect back years later and realize this was a good thing. It wasn't. It wasn't bad then, it's not good now, it just is. It's just a thing. You decide the meaning that you put on that event. In 2001, Donna and I were dating. We weren't engaged yet, and I'd been in town for about a year and a half or so, and I decided I was going to buy a house. So we start looking for a house. Gets to be the end of August. Close on the house, and it needs a lot of work, but we got a really good deal. And we're ready to get started working. We had actually moved up the closing a week because we wanted to get done and everything was ready with the bank. And so we go ahead and we close on a Friday, and on the following Tuesday, I got fired. Now, the house was just in my name because we weren't married or engaged or anything like that. And that was my only source of income. And when I tell that story, I get a lot of responses just like that. Oh. And I remember after that happened, thinking to myself, I guess I'm meant to stay here. Because if I'd gotten fired without having a house here, I probably would have moved. So I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. This is what's going to happen. And I'm still here. And now I'm married, and everything's worked out really well. And I often find that our attitude towards the situation also has a huge impact on that situation. You know, I am the thinker who thinks the thoughts. You know, I'm the one who changes the things that shape my life. So I don't have to forgive anybody at 84 Lumber for what happened and for me getting fired, because I look at it as a great experience. You know, and a friend of mine, his name's Mike Lowe, he said, just because the party's over doesn't mean it wasn't a good party. You know, so just because that thing, whatever it is, has ended, doesn't mean that it wasn't a good thing. It just means that it's time to move on to something else. You know, if we went to a party and it was if a party was at our house, my house, there's gonna come a time when that party needs to end. You know, maybe that's 11 o'clock, maybe it's midnight, maybe it's 3 a.m, maybe it's midnight the next day, but at some point you're going to go, I've had enough, I need to go to sleep. So when things end, try to look at that with the idea that this is something that's necessary for me to move on. So then you don't have to worry about forgiving anybody for that ending, because that's just what's happening. I saw Jeremy on Friday, and we were talking, and one of the quotes that I told him that I was going to use was this one from Buddha. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. So, you know, I'm talking about forgiveness, but it seems like I'm talking about ways to not to have to forgive. You know, if you're not holding on to that coal, you're not going to throw that hot coal at somebody that you've forgiven. It kind of defeats the purpose. So instead of holding on to that anger, let it go. Let them be who they want to be. The area that I think I see this the most is in politics. Okay? Is there anybody here who thinks that at some point in their lifetime there's been a politician who was elected to office whose views they didn't agree with? And I don't care what your views are. There's always going to be somebody that gets elected that you don't agree with. And I see people that get so upset and angry at that person. And I don't care which president it is. I promise you that the president doesn't know that you are upset about the decision that that person made. The only person that upset and that anger and that fear is hurting is you. Now, if you happen to be upset with your spouse, then you need to tell them and talk about it, and that's okay. But holding on to that anger and that resentment to someone that doesn't even know is not doing you any good. So forgive those people immediately. You will feel much, much better. And let's face it, being upset at them is probably not going to change their mind anyway. So thinking about all that, and thinking about everything I've said, I come to a quote from Wayne Dyer. All forgiveness is self-forgiveness. Those angers, those resentments, all that negative energy that we hold inside ourselves, it's only hurting us. It's only holding us back. When we forgive someone else for something that we think they did, it doesn't free them. It doesn't help them. It helps us. So even if it's somebody that you never want to see again, never want to spend time with, I don't want this person in my life, I don't like what they did, when you hold on to that, it doesn't help you. Forgive them, let it go, and allow that freedom to come back into your life. One of the stories that Anthony DeMello told, besides being a priest, he was also a therapist. And he said, people come to me, he said, and they're up to here in the river of, well, we'll go with poo. He goes, and you would think that they would want to know how to get out of the river. He goes, but more often than not, that's not the case. They don't want them to get out of the river. They just want to figure out how to calm the waves. So as we let go of all those hurts, we can get out of the river. Trying to figure out how to deal with that anger is calming the waves. Let go of it. Just get rid of it. You don't need it. Another quote the Buddha said, if someone offers you a gift and you decline to accept it, to whom does it belong? If someone's giving you something, if they're giving you their anger, if they're giving you negative energy from whatever source whatever kind it is, however it looks, fear, aggression, whatever, you don't have to accept it. If you don't accept it, then you don't have to worry about forgiving yourself later, because you don't have anything to forgive anybody for. So don't accept those things. Don't accept that negative energy from other people. And then if you do, because let's face it, we all do things that later we look at and we go, well, that was maybe not the best decision at that point. We get caught up in the emotion of things. As soon as you realize that happens, forgive. Forgive yourself, forgive the other person, let it go. I know we have a Course in Miracles study group that happens, and if you guys have seen the Course in Miracles, it's thick. I mean, there's a lot there. And then you do it every day for a year, and then there's the workbook, and people say you should do it several times for several years. But at the beginning, I was always kind of a Cliff Notes kind of guy. It says, this course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And as you go through the course, you see that there are lots of illusions that we're living in. So when you get upset at someone, when somebody does something that you think you're going to end up having to forgive them for or want to forgive them for later, know that who you truly are, what you truly are, cannot be hurt. And what they truly are is also pure and divine. It's the Christ within them. So their illusion did something that your illusion doesn't like. Let it go. Forgive them. And as you do that, you will experience a freedom. That we're not tied down to those negative emotions. If you look at little kids, and we've got little kids here, yes, kids get upset when they don't get their way, but it doesn't usually last very long, and they very quickly go back to being happy. Now, could be they're really short memories, but that's not a bad thing. But typically they don't hold on to grudges. That's not something that comes till they get a little older. So that's the way we are. We've learned over the years, to hold on to those grudges, to get people back for things that they've done to us, to get even with people. It's just an illusion that we're fighting with. Forgive it, let it go. And as you have less and less negative energy in you and around you, then more things that you want to experience will come. Growing up, whenever my mother would say grace, or prayers at family gatherings or whatever it was, she always said, all good and perfect gifts come from above. And I think we get stuck into that idea that we have to, and there are things about that, where you do something and you get something in return. But when you do those good works, it doesn't mean that the return is going to come from where you did the work, because everything's connected. So if you do good over here, maybe the blessing will come from over here. And as you let go of those negative emotions, as you forgive everyone and everything for everything, you open yourself up to receive more good. That negativity is blocking that good from coming in. And then with the conversation with Jeremy, he said to look up some stuff by Emmett Fox. It is not possible that you could ever find yourself anywhere God was not fully present, fully active, able and willing to set you free. So as I talk about forgiving yourself for whatever has happened or done, and forgiving everyone else, know that this can happen anywhere, at any place. I've often wondered, as people talk and they go around and they, that there are different places that are more spiritual or have more positive energy. And I've often thought to myself, God is omnipresent. So maybe there are places where there is more negative energy, more people that have forgotten to let go. But it can happen anywhere. It can happen here, it can happen on the ride home, it can happen at your house, at your work, whatever. Part of it is just being aware of what's going on around you and what you're feeling. And when you feel something that doesn't serve you, forgive and let it go. That whole forgive and forget. It's not, I've forgiven you and I'm not going to let you forget about it. It's forgiving and moving on, and don't give it another thought. One last quote from Anthony DeMello. The greatest learning of the ages lies in accepting life exactly as it comes to us. That's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So if you can think about that, and think about trying to accept things as they are and as they come to us, and when we slip, when we aren't able to accept things exactly as they are, forgive. And let go of that energy that you don't want. Let go of that energy that's not serving you. And then go back to accepting things as they are.